Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar from SPEC Innovations, an overview of requirements management and analysis using Innoslate. My name is Elizabeth Steiner, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. First, I would like to go over some housekeeping. During the presentation, feel free to send us questions, and we will get them answered in the workshop part of the webinar. You can also interact with us on LinkedIn through the Innoslate user group or through Twitter using the handle @Innoslate. The webinar is being recorded and we will make it available to you after the live presentation, so be sure to keep an eye out for it in your inbox. Now I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Daniel Hettema. He'll be sharing with you how to manage your requirements and analyze them through Innoslate's requirements features. Daniel Hettema is a systems engineer here at SPEC Innovations. He assisted in the development of Innoslate. Daniel continues to lead the developers in improving the systems engineering applications in their software development. He has also co-authored several published papers including Applying Systems Thinking to Model-Based Systems Engineering, an Agile Systems Engineering Approach to Software Project Development. He has also done modeling and architecture development for the Department of the Navy, United States Marine Corps, and United States Army. Feel free to send Daniel any questions through the LinkedIn user group or send him an email. And now I will hand over the controls to Daniel and we will get started.
Hello, my name is Daniel Hettema, and so for our agenda today we're going to be talking about requirements engineering versus requirements management. Why do we need requirements management? What does good requirements management include? Performing requirements management inside Innoslate. Then I'm going to do a live demonstration of how to do all of this, and finally we'll have a questions and answer period at the end. One thing I would like to point out that this webinar will not be focusing on how to write good requirements. We've done blog posts and there's plenty of publications from IEEE and INCOSE on how to do that, and so we're really not going to focus on that today. So the first thing is, what is requirements engineering versus requirements management? Well, requirements engineers, the way we treat them here at SPEC, is they tend to focus purely on the requirement. So they look at their specifying how everything shall be, and their tasks really include recognizing, analyzing, synthesizing, and various writing of the requirement. Really, they do tend to focus on that classic, the system shall perform some task. Whereas requirements management does include parts of requirements engineering, but it also tends to focus more on management-like tasks, things like structure, ontology, traceability, verification, and validation. And not to mention that it also includes relationships to other SE tasks, things like functional and physical analysis along with architecture development. So here's a definition from Stevens and Martin, and they define requirements management as the identification, derivation, allocation, and control in a consistent, traceable, correlatable, verifiable manner of the system's functions, attributes, interfaces, and verification methods that a system must meet, including customer-derived and specialty engineering needs. And as you can see, they don't define requirements management literally as focusing on an individual requirement. They like to keep it very big, and that's how we consider requirements management. It is really the relationship with a lot of other things and how it's all organized. So why do we need requirements management? Well, the first real reason is we're dealing with large projects. If you're dealing with a small project with 1 or 2 people, you probably don't need to do a lot of this complex overhead requirements management. But if you have to deal with many disciplines or even a multi-year project, all this requirements management is necessary because you're dealing with such a large quantity of requirements. Another good reason why we need good requirements management is if we're having many stakeholders. All these stakeholders can be providing us requirements, be it implicit or explicit, and these stakeholders could be anyone from a customer to users and performers. And another good example of why we need requirements management is if we're dealing with complex technologies. And as you can see on this graph on the right, it's a list of all the design requirements growth for aerospace vehicles. And you can see when flight first started in 1903, there was very little requirements. They were categorized into things like just being able to fly. But by the time we really get flowing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there's a lot of additional requirements categorizations. Things like non-nuclear, worrying about noise, worrying about the various smart weapons and things like that. And you can see just the increase in complexity as we've increased the technology associated with flight. So why do we really need that requirements management? Well, the big thing is the fact that we need to get to a repeatable basic process. There's no need to reinvent the process every time. The whole idea is the fact that we should be able to identify a basic process and then make changes to that underlying process as needed so that way it meets what we're currently working on. And really the masterful goal about this is the fact that it should improve efficiency by allowing repeat use of requirements within one project and across multiple projects. So another key to requirements management is traceability. Really, we need to be able to keep track of who modified and created, when it was created and modified, and how did it change from version to version. And as you can see here, really we need to be able to say, hey, this derived requirement was built from this requirement number 1, which was from the statement of work. It provides this overall context. And often in the DoD and other various industries, it can be used for auditing purposes to say, yes, this is why we're doing this because of that requirement. So here's a good example of how requirements management can aid in writing better requirements. So the DC-3 by Douglas was a follow-on to the DC-2. And one of the original requirements that were asked was, it shall have 3 engines. And they had some smart engineers at the time, and they asked the question, well, why? Why does it need to have 3 engines? Why the DC-2 does just fine with 2? Why 3? And so the rationale that was provided back was so that it can land with an engine failure. And so they recognized that, oh, the real requirement is shall be able to land with 1 engine failure. And one of the great things about doing proper requirements management is the fact you can capture those transitions from that original requirement of shall have 3 engines to the real requirement of shall be able to land with 1 engine failure. And so that way you can see that traceability across that lines. But the other big thing about requirements management is a little bit with writing requirements, writing good requirements. So for example, if we have bad requirements, like the example I have here, the pot shall have 2 handles. Well, as you can see in that picture, it does have 2 handles. Now this isn't very useful, but yes it does, but we need to get to writing good requirements. So for example, the better requirement for this kind of situation would be the pot's handles shall be placed in a line on either side of the pot's opening. And now all of a sudden we're implying more of what we're looking for. Or another perfect example is the watering can spigot shall be above the fill hole. Well, as you can see in the image, the watering can spigot is above the fill hole, but unless we're trying to do some sort of recursive watering system here, it's not all that useful. And so really what we want to start saying are things like the watering can spigot shall face away from the handle. And requirements management really aids in trying to understand as we morph these bad requirements into the proper good ones. So here's a good old SC idiom that I remember hearing years ago called the number 1 cause of requirements creep was the word processor. And really this was driven by the fact that there was, when requirements had to be written on a typewriter, it was very difficult and time consuming to go back and change them. All of a sudden computers and the word processor came around, it became infinitely easy to go in and change your requirements. And so there's that old joke with, yes, now with word processors, we have more requirements creep. So what does good requirements management include? Well, the first thing you've got to start identifying is what standards will be followed. You can follow standards from IEEE, NASA, the Department of Defense, or various other industries, or maybe even your organization has a standard that you follow. The other thing we got to look at is how will the requirements be organized? Will they be organized and controlled in one way, and how will you be directing them so that way they move from one side to the other across the whole life cycle? And finally, how will they be verified? You got to start going, well, can I verify this requirement via one of the verification methods? Things like test, demonstration, checked, etc. Another key thing with requirements management is baselining. Really what this does is it establishes a common base between stakeholders. This allows you to control and manage the scope and requirements creep. This way you can kind of go, this is my baseline and these are where I'm building to, and then we can go forward from there. This also allows you to start tracking requirements changes through the process. And we've actually seen baselining be used to indicate various milestones as they go. So they can baseline the requirements and say, okay, we're going to support up to this level, and then you can increase and then go, oh, the next version will have this next level of baselining. Requirements management needs to include traceability. And I mean traceability not to the original source artifact. And we need that, but we also need traceability to the model elements that are being developed as we start building this architecture and building the system. And really this allows even you to start traceability all the way to your V and V methods. So when you're doing all that analysis, you can go, how are we doing this? How is it traced? How are we making sure we're getting complete coverage? And the key with coverage is we want to make sure we're building what matches the requirements. This way we're not over-engineering things. This gets into that old gold plating system where why are we making something like it is? I don't know. It's not traced to that requirement. And this way you can really get that good context of what's going on. And with context, we focus on, okay, well, I can now see my whole image of this is where I'm starting to build something. I can trace that line through and see the original source artifact that all these requirements came for, and really it makes it a great way to learn a system easier, especially if you're having a lot of turnover. So inside Innoslate, we have what's called the requirements class, and on the requirements class we have some properties, and you can see here we have a list of those properties. The first three are name, number, description, and the description is where we put the classic requirements text. We next have rationale, and then below that we have a set of 9 properties that are kind of focused on the quality, and we call those the quality properties. And actually Innoslate has a requirements checker that uses natural language processing to go ahead and automatically check the requirements, the clear, complete, design, and verifiable. And it'll look at those requirements and provide some insight and guidance to help write better requirements. One of the other nice things with Innoslate is we have what's called labels. And so these can be categorizations or groupings of types of requirements. So for example, we have environmental, functional, performance, safety, and verification. And really this allows you to start doing sorting and filtering. And one of the neat things with Innoslate is instead of just having it in one bin, each requirement shall only be in one bin, we're able to actually have multiple labels on each requirement. So we can have, for example, a requirement that has an environmental label and also a safety label. And this way when you start getting into that later phases with your V and V, you can go back and say, okay, make sure we test it both on the environmental side and also the safety side. One of the nice things with Innoslate is the ability to add new properties. So for example, if you need to add a property of importance, source, or accept, you can easily do that. We understand that not those attributes that I identified earlier may not be all the attributes you need to do the requirements management that you're looking for. You can also add the new labels. So for example, we've often used labels, things like originating, derived, or version 1 for kind of grouping. And kind of a note with the schema extension is that if each requirement is going to have a different value, we recommend the use of a property because of the fact that it is tied one-to-one. But if you're going to have many requirements that kind of have the same value, probably a label is more what you're looking for because you can focus more on the grouping side. So inside Innoslate, we do have what's called the requirements view, and this is a great view that keeps all of your requirements and their documents together in one place that can be easily edited and viewed as you go through. And I'll be talking a lot about this as we get into the demo later on. But with the data that we have, you also need multiple ways to view it, and we have a couple diagrams that really focus on showing these kind of things. The first is the tree diagram, and this provides you a great way to view large hierarchies. So for example, if you have a document that has 4, 5, 6 levels of decomposition, the tree diagram gives you the ability to go in and display out and visualize all this hierarchy and really give you a better understanding. The other diagram that really helps with requirements management is the spider diagram. And the spider diagram is great because of the fact it shows relationships. And so not only relationships to the source artifact, but also relationships back on out to the model elements that we'll be building as we go on. And this way you can see, okay, do I meet my traceability that I'm looking for? Or for example, later on the line, if you go, well, how did I come to this one task or action or performer, you can follow the traceability back to that source document. Innoslate has a very advanced collaboration feature that allows you to work with your coworkers and collaborate with them on the same requirements document at once. No longer do you have to spend the time merging your two requirements document because each one of you are working in two separate repositories. You can work together on the same document with each other and even chat, and we have some other neat features built in, and I'll be talking about that as we go. And the final thing is reports. Just because we can do a lot in Innoslate, we recognize the fact that you're going to need to take this data out and use it in other locations. So we do have requirements reports, change reports based on baselining, entity hierarchy, and matrix reports that show relationships, along with comment and history reports. And all these are built into the tools so that you can use and get that data out in some format that allows you to go on and continue working with them in a structure you're familiar with. So now I'm going to go into a live demonstration for you. So when you first log into Innoslate, you're greeted by the dashboard. And here's a good place where you can start seeing a lot of what you're looking for. But we're going to start with our requirements document that we already have. Now, I've recognized that some people may or may not have a requirements document, but for this example, we're going to focus on if you do. If you don't, there's a lot you can still do, and as we go through, I'll explain all that. So while we're going to import a requirements document is we're going to go to Menu, Import Analyzer, and then select Import File. And we're going to go ahead and import the Virtual Art Viewer requirements. It's going to pop up and ask for a number, and we're going to switch over, and you can see here's the Word doc of these requirements, and you can see that first number is 1 dot, and so you can see it's a very nicely numbered document, and so we're going to go back, and we're going to go ahead and let this do it. And this virtual art viewer is from the University of California, Irvine, the CS department there, and it's talking about how we're looking to build some sort of web interface that allows customers to view and print various photos and pictures of that they're come up with. So you can see once it's done analyzing and it's gone through and it's identified things for you and started to build that hierarchy based on those numbers. So this way we're not having to manually go in and create each one of these requirements. And you can see we just have 90 right here, and that would take a while, and that took off just less than a couple seconds. Innoslate can also import some CSVs. So for example, I have another one that I want to import. So we're going to go back to Menu, Import Analyzer, and we're going to click the other CSV. And so this CSV is from the Open Mobile Alliance, and it was a draft set of requirements from 2005. And so this CSV went through and automatically did the same thing, looking at the numbers, it built the hierarchy, identified what the parents are and what needs to happen. So, but I just imported two documents. How do I switch between them? Well, the way you switch between them is you see in this drop-down box, we have the name of the document. Well, we're going to go ahead and click that, and by clicking on that, we're able to select which ones we want, and we can go ahead and switch back to that first document, the Virtual Art Viewer Requirements document. And so now we're back in that first screen I showed you. Well, in this screen, I want to highlight a couple key areas. The first being right in the middle, which is where the actual requirements are. And if you actually click on an individual row, it actually pops up in an editable field. And you can see here we have our number up in that left right here, followed by the name, and then the description field right in the middle. And you can add and modify your description right here. If you'd also noticed on the left, the panel changed. And so now we have things like labels that I've talked about. Attributes would be here and things like that. So one of the cool features with Innoslate is how easy it is to go through and modify things. And so I'm going to go through, and let's say we want to take every painting will always be on one theme and go through. And we want to come to this one, and we want to modify this. Well, one of the things that sometimes happens is it always doesn't come in the correct class. Well, we can fix that by easily just going to More, Transform to Requirement. And just like that, now this is a requirement, and I can go, okay, well, this is clearly a functional requirement, and I just added that label. And I can come over here to my attributes that we've talked about before, and identify the which one we're looking for. So I can say, is this a requirement even feasible? Yes. And then if I click this green checkbox, I'd save. If I click the red cancel button, it would cancel. But one of the other cool features that we can do is we can just click off it and it would automatically save and then click on to the next one. This one really increases your ability to go through and modify all of your requirements as you go. But that's just focusing on modifying it by myself. I really like to work with a teammate. And so I've already shared my project with Christopher Ritter, one of my coworkers, and you can actually do this by coming up to this share icon up in that top right. Clicking on this, you type in the name of the email address that you're trying to share with, and this gives you a couple options here. You have owner, read write, and read only. Owner allows you to give the other person full permission over the project, including sharing. Read only gives the person gives the person permission to do model changes, so reading and writing in the model. And finally, read only is very useful if you're sharing with things like your customer or other stakeholders and you want them to provide comments. And Innoslate has the ability to provide comments inside the fields. I'm going to go ahead and I've already shared with Chris, and so we can go through and do that. So you can see here, Christopher Ritter is already viewing and he's looking at my requirements document, and we have, let's see, 1.1.1 already highlighted, and you can see there's a little C there. And if I actually pull up this chat window by clicking on the chat icon on the top right, and I can go to online users and see where he is. And if you notice, he's already gone through, clicked off to something else, and there's a flag down in that bottom right corner that says 1 out of date. And he's gone through and actually modified one requirement, and it's letting me know that something has changed. So I just have to click on this flag. And just like that, I've taken his new update, and I know that he's changed 1.1. And you can see he added the word modified. The other cool thing we have in Innoslate is group chat. And so you can see here that he's already asked permission to go ahead and make changes. And I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I'll be watching. And just like that, we're communicating with each other within the tool. This way we don't have to leave the tool to use some other external communication method. So we can close this this chat feature just by collapsing it back. And one of the other things that I'd like to point out is comments as we talk about collaboration here. Chris probably went through and left a little comment here for me, and you can see here that he left a comment on this top level one saying that many of these requirements don't have the word shall, so we may need to start looking at updating them. And that is very true. So may have to task him to do that. So now I'm going to do a little TV magic for myself, because I'm going to move to one that's already been modified and cleaned up a little bit. And then we're going to talk, and here we are. And now we're going to talk about extending that schema. So currently you saw we had those 9 attributes and rationale, so 10 total properties on the requirements class. But even for me right now in my situation, that may not be enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the schema and add another property to the requirements class. To do this, you click on the menu button in the top left and then click Schema Editor. And so we're going to select Requirements. And right in the middle where it says Properties Add, go ahead and click that. I'm going to add a new property called Importance. And I'm going to give it a description of the relative importance of the requirement. Oops. There we go. Lower values are more important. Now, obviously, this is a fairly poor description, but it gets the idea across. And next, we can go ahead and select what type of property we're looking for. We have things like text, numbers, booleans, percentages, URIs or URLs, but we're going to go ahead and click number for this one. And then we click done. We go ahead and click quick save, And then we go back to the requirements class, to the requirements view, I mean. And so if we go ahead and click on one of these requirements, and we go to these attributes, you can see down here we have an importance attribute. And so we can actually add, so let's say this one would be 1. And then we click the green checkbox. Well, but now you can't see it. Well, the requirements view really allows you to get in and customize what you're looking at. So we're going to go ahead and add that column to this view. By clicking on the gear icon in that top right, we're going to click on that, then settings. And I'm just by removing these by clicking on the little red X's, the little blue X, excuse me, go ahead and add back in importance, because that's the one I just added. Feasible, one of the 9 ones that we talked about earlier. And we're going to add quality score, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. You then hit Save Changes. And now we've updated our view of what we're looking at. And so now you can see we do have an importance column, a feasible column, and a quality score column. So I can go in and right here modify these values and say that I feel like this one needs to be a 1, this one should be a 2, this should be a 3, and this one be a 5. And just like that, I can modify these and really keep up. And we can even modify things like feasible. So for example, if we want to say this one is feasible, yes, we can do that. And then click the green checkbox. One of the great things with this view is the fact that you can always sort on these things. Just by clicking on the column header, you can sort on them. So for example, I click once and we're sorting up, and you have a lot of NAs because those are actually statements. But if we click again, I'm now sorting down, and you can see the fact that I can rank them 5, 3, 2, 1, 1, and you can actually see that and see which requirement is associated with that top level importance. This is also really great for identifying quality score, and quality score is the combination of all those 9 attributes into one field that kind of rates the overall quality of that requirement. And so you can see if I do this process again and I click on that, we can see we do have a 1 that's very high at 56. And you can come over here to these attributes on the left and kind of modify them. And clear, complete, design, and verifiable are the ones that automatically are tested. And you have to come in as a proper requirements manager to come in and identify things like, well, is this correct? Yes. And just by clicking on that, my score once again goes up a little bit more. Clicking on it again sends us back to that default view with that hierarchy label showing. But a lot of the times these could be a lot of requirements, and we have 90 requirements here, but I'm only able to see a couple. I need to start collapsing these, and we can do this what's called the collapsers and folding right here. By selecting this little dash mark, we're able to collapse that hierarchy. And now all of a sudden, all those requirements that were under create new paintings are now hidden from our view, and so we can keep doing that. And this way you can really kind of see your hierarchy. And we even do have some built-in niceties for you, like a collapse all up here in that top right, or expand all. But a lot of the times when I'm working, I always go, okay, I like to know where I'm at in context of the overall document. And with no entities selecting, no requirements selected, you can actually see this hierarchy tab on the left. If you click on that, you actually see a long list, and you can see a whole lot more of your requirements that you have, and you can actually go ahead and collapse and expand inline, and it reflects what's going on in the view. And this way you know, okay, I'm working on this one. Well, where was I in that hierarchy? You can keep up as what you're looking at. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is baselining. I mentioned that baselining was one of the key things that's needed for requirements management, and inside Innoslate we do have that. So with all we have to do to baseline a document is go ahead and click the baseline document. And so you give it a name. So for example, I'm going to call this one V1 for version 1. I'm going to go ahead and create. And one of the things that you'll notice right away is the fact that all those little yellow-orange bars on that left side now change to blue. And that's to signify that those requirements have been baselined and have not changed since they were last updated. Now I can go in and modify one of these other requirements. So let's say this one needs to be at, instead of 2, and I save it, and you can now see that that requirement has turned to a little orange bar. And there is now, that's to signify that this requirement has changed since that last baseline. But you can always go back and view that previous baseline by clicking on the document name, and where it says baseline, you can switch there. This will pull up the previous version, and there you go. You can see that importance is now back to 1. So we're going to go back to that full document. Let's see. And we're going to talk about how do you add requirements. This was a lot that I've been talking about of just focusing on modifying existing requirements. Well, what happens when I need to add requirements? Well, in Innoslate, you can easily do that. So our example is here right now. We have something that says administrators shall have to be verified using a login and password that is issued. The application should offer the administrator's set of user interfaces, so on and so forth. And this is really a couple of requirements in one. So we need to either decompose it or add another. So I'm going to go ahead and decompose it and add requirements underneath it to kind of break those out. And so you can see I can just click on the requirement I want, and then up in that top left, now these two buttons have changed to add after and add child. So I'm going to select what I'm looking to do, and so we're going to take the second part of that requirement. I'm going to go ahead and just do it using the built-in functions. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to add one after, and you can see it's automatically placed it in the right number with the right place so that it comes right after that, and click the green check to save. And just like that, we've added one right after. But what happens when we need to add one, well, a child below that? Well, a great example I have of this one is if I switch back to this mobile requirements document, you can see here I have some requirements here that they're a bulleted list. Well, I need to take that bulleted list and turn those into children. And so what I can do is I can click on my requirement and do add child and type in a few and then click the green checkbox. And actually now here I can actually just do the add after and repeat the process. And just like that, we're able to go in and modify these requirements. And I can come back in and delete the ones I don't need. We can now actually run our requirements quality checker individually on all these requirements by just clicking this run quality check button up in that top left. So I'm going to switch back to my other document and talk about another cool feature that we have, which is the auto numbering and moving. So for example here, I have way down at this very bottom, miscellaneous. Well, I really kind of want to put that at the very, I'll put that at the very top. Or for example, actually I'm going to change that. I want to move this down one. So I'm going to change this one to 4 and go ahead and click the green check. And so you can see that we've changed that number, but it hasn't moved. The children's number haven't changed. Well, I can utilize the auto number feature built into Innoslate by clicking on that requirement under the more. Actually, it's under the auto number when it's nothing selected, and you go ahead and click on that, and then you can provide a prefix. So a lot of the times when I've done this, we're dealing with things like various directives and things, and so we're trying to put a prefix in. So for example, like DOD 5000, we'd put that as a prefix. But for this example, I'm not going to put any prefix in. And what this is going to do, it's going to renumber all of my documents and clean all those up. And so you can see we've gone through, and a couple of them have changed from what we were looking at. And so we can once again baseline, give it a new name. And just like that, we've baselined our requirements. I've talked about in my slides about the ability to provide traceability about who changed and when. Well, in Innoslate, we do that via what's called history. And to get to that, we do we click on an entity and we do go to entity view. And up here we have this history button. And right here we can see all of these versions that have been changed as we've gone through, and each one as they've been modified. And so you can see you can always revert back to that version, so that way you'd never lose that data. And one of the great things is everything you see in requirements view is also visible right here. And this is called entity view. We have that description. We have those 9 attributes. We have a more implicit version of this hierarchical relationship and these relationships on the side. So we're going to go back to requirements view and talk about, well, this is great. How do I actually start showing it off? Well, we can show off this great hierarchy in that document tree hierarchy that I showed about earlier. And to do that, we go to the More, Diagrams, Document Tree hierarchy. And you can see here we have just a couple levels shown. But let's say we want to start showing them and we just need to focus on 1 or 2. Well, here we can just click on them and we can expand them as needed. One of the great things about Innoslate is the fact that we can always add more requirements. And it's not just in requirements view that we can add them. I can go ahead and drag a requirement over from that left panel, and you see where the little green dot turns green. If I drop it there, it'll automatically add that as a child. And so we can give this a quick description of the painting. And just like that, we've added another one to that. And you can see how great this is. If you got people working at the same time, they can view the data in different ways. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick save. And this way we don't have to leave anything and jump back to requirements view. From here, one of the other nice things we have is what's called the hierarchy chart. And so you can click on a single entity and go to the More, Diagrams, Hierarchy chart. You can see here's another way to view this hierarchy, giving you many different ways to show off the data in a format that matches to what you're looking for. And just like in the requirements diagram, we can easily add another one right below it. It's a very simple task. And we've even met people who prefer working in this kind of organized visual structure. So I'm going to go back to requirements view and talk about our third diagram that really is key to requirements view and requirements management. It's the traceability spider. And to get to this, we go to More, Diagrams, Traceability spider. And you can see here that it starts identifying at 3 levels, but we can always expand that, of following these relationships. And it looks at the source by, decomposed by, trace to, performs. And all these are the relationships that kind of build out the model as you go. And so from this, we can actually start looking at, okay, well, how does this one requirement relate to something else? And we can actually add ones from right here. So for example, I need to add an asset of the system. So I can just drag one over and call this one administrative admin system. And I can add a relationship between this admin system and that function. And just like that, I can start building this. And this is really great for when you have to interact with all the functional and physical analysis people and show them how everything relates to one another. We're going to do a quick save and come back to requirements view. I mentioned in the slides that reports are one of the key things that you need. And so Innoslate does have a couple reports built in, and you can actually get to our basic requirements one right here. Just by clicking on this report button, we have an option for you to select what kind of report you're looking for. A basic requirements output document with nice headers, or maybe you would like a baseline report, and you can select if you like docx or HTML, and just by clicking create, it'll automatically take those requirements and put them into a nice report for you that you can go ahead and customize as you need. And the final place I want to talk about is the dashboard that we hit on when we first came in. And you can see how much the dashboard has changed from when we first started this project. Now all of a sudden we have all these recent notifications of what's been changing, how it's been adding. We have interesting statistics that allow me to really dig in and understand my overall model. And we can even, if we're looking to get more into it, we can look at, okay, well, let's say I need to go into requirements analysis and just select that in the getting started plane, and I can create new requirements documents all from right here. So with that, that actually concludes the live demonstration part, and I'm going to hand it back to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Daniel. We've received several questions already. If you haven't done so, please send your questions through the panel on the right. Daniel will answer as many questions as he can before our time is up. Our first question is, what kinds of information can be garnered from the hierarchy diagram that is unique to the diagram type?
What kind of information can you say that again one more time for me?
What kind of information can be garnered from the hierarchy diagram that is unique to the diagram type?
The hierarchy diagram really focuses on just showing the hierarchy. It allows you to visualize that. You can go ahead and modify boxes, change their size and color and position, but pretty much that focus is just showing you on the overall hierarchy and what the relations are parent and child. And that's the same for both the hierarchy and also the tree diagram. The tree diagram just is a little bit nicer at displaying large data sets, hierarchy for a little bit more compact data sets.
Our next question is, what types of error messages does the import analyzer produce when it has issues importing a document?
So I am not fully up to date on all those error messages. I'm sure there's plenty of them or quite a few. I'm sure that I can talk with you and Elizabeth and figure out what's going on. I'll have to talk to the development team on those. I don't have a list of every possible error message that could be outputted on that, so I'll have to contact you on those.
Our next question is, as we all know, customer documents are rarely static. How does Innoslate manage versions of documents? How is traceability managed to already imported requirements when a new version of the document is imported?
So currently in Innoslate, you can manage your versions by baselining, as I showed earlier. As you have your document, you can go ahead and baseline it. You bring in that new version and baseline it from there. If you're looking for a more advanced round-tripping type of thing, nothing right now on that. You can always utilize just kind of a good naming convention and switch between documents that way.
Our next question is, I like the features to see that the requirement was outdated. How can you see that what changes were made to a requirement when someone else made the change? Basically, how does one do a compare of versions?
So the best way to view versions is with that history icon, history button I showed you in Entity View. Or if you do have it properly baselined, you can actually run a baseline report and see the differences. That's just something I didn't show off right now, but that will actually tell you, okay, this is what it was and this is what it's now currently. And so you can see the two differences that way.
Our next question is, could we export/share these requirements with another tool, like maybe Magic Draw, for use in a SysML model, from Magic Draw back into Innoslate?
Sure. For Magic Draw, I believe it supports what's called RecIf, which is a requirements interchange standard. And it's something that we're actually implementing into Innoslate and should be out by Q1 of 2015. And that's really to allow these requirements to be modified in one tool and changed in Innoslate and come back and forth, and it's kind of a big loop that can happen. And this is all being added in Q1. I probably didn't answer the question, but what was the question one more time?
The question was, could we export/share these requirements with another tool, like maybe Magic Draw, for use in a SysML model?
Yes. So the answer would be you can once we have RecIf, that will allow that nicely done and with the collaboration back and forth between the two tools.
Our next question is, what does the quality check actually represent? Is it the quality of the requirement, or does it have another meaning?
So the quality check actually represents the quality of that individual requirement. It's based on those nine characteristics, properties I talked about at the beginning: verifiable, traceable, all those, clear, concise. I can't remember them all. And it's looking at, okay, it takes an even percentage of all those and says, do you pass and fail at each one of these? And so that quality score is just an aggregation of all of those into a nice interface to give you kind of an understanding of, okay, how am I doing on my overall quality based on those 9 attributes?
Our next question is, can Innoslate filter on multiple labels simultaneously?
Yes, Innoslate can filter on multiple labels. You can actually do that easily in search is actually the best way to do it. And actually, if you'd like, I can get in contact with you and explain that. That's a separate thing we have documented elsewhere for you.
Our next question is, how/where do detailed user use cases between systems and users fits in?
How/where does use cases fit in with requirements? Is that
Between system and user.
okay? So a lot of our use cases, we'd capture those in the kind of action class and model those appropriately. And we have what's a relationship that's called trace to and trace from. And you'd be able to provide those connections from those that you've modeled into that requirement and have that connection there. We don't have anything specific for exactly that case, but we have an abstract version that will allow you to do exactly what you're looking for.
Our last question is a follow-up question to that. Is it suitable for user stories for UX work as well?
As in, is Innoslate suitable for user stories? I would. Yes, you could do user stories. Really depends on how you do a lot of your user stories. We tend to do things like scenarios, and we do those all the time in Innoslate, and then relate those to the requirements diagram. If you're looking to do more of just a textual-based user story, yeah, you can do that in requirements view or one of our documents view and have that there too. So Innoslate is very flexible around what you're looking to do.
Thank you for your questions. That is all we have time for today. If you still have more questions, please feel free to reach out to Daniel after the webinar. We would like to thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. As a reminder, we will be following up with you very soon to send you a link to the recording and the presentation slide deck. We would also like to invite you to our next webinar in January, so be sure to check your email for the invitation. We also encourage you to visit our website and our blog, as well as connect with us on social media. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you again for your attendance, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar in January. Please enjoy the rest of your day.